Welcome everybody to the Arts and Craftsmen Guild monthly meeting. We have one of our juried artists from Guild that's going to be demoing for us. Suzanne, I've known for a very long time. Her name is Suzanne O'Brien. When I had my art gallery many years ago, she did fabulous work. I took some of her classes. You can see the variety of work that she does. She does wet felting. She's been doing it since 2011. Yes. And she started it, and she could tell you the whole story, but when she lived in New Zealand with her family. So she learned this and brought it home here. And I have to just say, I just found this out tonight. This is one of her very first piece that she ever made. And she still has it. It's a cute little purse. And I think it's lovely. But I highly recommend just taking a class from her sometime. She teaches all over the place besides on a campus. But she's going to explain her step by step. And it's just a great craft to learn. Really. All right, Suzanne, it goes.
Thank you, Paulette. Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne O'Brien. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, so I'm a fiber artist juried in this Arts and Craftsmen Guild. I'm also a juried artist in the Broadcasters Art Association. That's a new development from last year. Exciting. I am I'm not a formally trained artist, so I have a background in plant science and horticulture. So when I was living overseas with my husband, our children were really small, and I needed so I was part of a knitting group just to be out and meet people in this foreign country and taking some alone time because I had really small children, and all of my jobs were cyclic, like, you know, laundry, dishes, and they're all dirty the next day, and you never know. You just don't have anything to show for your productivity in the day. So I went to a knitting group and I met a woman named Anne. She's a great friend. And she had asked me if I'd done any felting. And I really had no idea what she was talking about. So I said, I don't know what you're talking about, Anne. And so we did a cute little crafty co-op kind of group where there was a few of us ladies who would 1 month would teach a project. The next, you know, someone would host it at their house and someone would bring the snacks. We kind of rotated throughout. And Anne's project for our group of ladies was this notion pouch. So we were all knitters. We all met at the coffee shop every week, every Tuesday. And so this was the project that Anne had to make us make. This is my very first wet felting project. So it had a little needle flap inside that I sewed. So the project was, you know, it's a seamless wet felted piece. So it was around a resist, which is a topic that a lot of my projects, my classes now incorporate with. But I brought it here because you can see like how unfinished it is. It's all fluffy and it's pilling like crazy, and you know, but everyone starts a new craft at, you know, the same level, you know, and the more you practice that piece, the more you will learn, and the more you do something, you always get better at it. So I'll keep this piece forever and ever because it reminds me of, well, number one, my wonderful friend Anne, and then yeah, what I've done in the last 14 years. So this was 2011, my very first project. And my artwork here is what you can see what I've done since we moved to the United States, back to the United States. And then for those at home, there's some photographs after the recording. that you'll be able to see. So I'm going to talk about my felting journey while I'm creating felt. So a lot of times when I say I'm a wet felter or I'm a felt maker, a lot of people just have this glossy eye. They really don't know what I'm talking about. You know, it's a lot of it is like, you mean the stuff from Joann's? Well, it won't be Joann's anymore, but so felt, what is felt? Felt is a non-woven fabric. So felt from Joann's is made from acrylic fibers that are mashed together with a machine. I make felt with wool fibers that interlock when I use warm water and soap and agitation to create that non-woven fabric. So the wool itself has a little microscopic little barbs along its fiber. And so when you add warm water and soap, those scales or those barbs open up. And then once the agitation starts, those barbs like start to bind together and hook and form that non-woven fabric. So the fiber that I use usually for my pieces are super fine merino wool. That's 18 micron, so it's really soft to the skin because a lot of my pieces are wearables. So we want to make sure that they're nice and gentle. And that fiber comes to me in 20-pound bumps of this undyed wool. So then I also hand dye fiber for creative persons who spin or also felt. So all of my dyed fiber is feltable. I don't want to be mixing up superwash fibers and non-superwash fibers. I've been there. Then you teach a class with a wool that's been treated not to felt, and then you're in a bad place. So this is wool roving, or some kind people call it top. This is a really fine wool. This piece right here is also super fine merino, but it is in a bat. So it's been run through a carding machine. So it's a little fluffier. I've been able to mix colors with this one. And I can mix silk fibers with that drum carder machine. And then sometimes I use commercially dyed fibers. So this, I ordered some black fiber. So this comes from a company in Texas, Living Felts. So what I'm going to do right now is make a round vessel with a resist. So this is the resist material. It is flooring, like underlay. So I buy this, 10 by 40 feet at a time, big roll. And just work my way through those templates. My blue bubble wrap is also household equipment. This is the pool solar cover, just because they don't make bubble wrap in larger amounts that I need. So when I start a felting project, I will lay out the wool in fine layers. I always lay the wool around the outside of a piece. Just this one time, just to make sure that there's wool fibers around the outside. So the way felt is made is you overlap layers of wool. So if you can see, I'm overlapping. And those here might have to watch this video at home to see the up close version. But what I'm doing is I'm laying those staples down a third overlapping the previous layer. I'm working my way from the bottom to the top. So I worked from the bottom to the top, and now I lay a perpendicular layer from side to side. They're pretty rough, but I did lotion it before. So now I'm putting this whole 2 pieces down with olive oil soap and some warm water. See, my other householdy tool here is a summertime show Gatorade bottle. So there, I'm just pressing that water through the wool fibers. So that they start to get wet. I'm gonna take that layer. When you make a round vessel using a resist technique, the resist can be anything. It can be this foam piece underlay, it can be a piece of bubble wrap, it can be flexible like vinyl tablecloth, anything that you have. Just something that will stop wool from binding from the top layer of wool from binding to the bottom layer.
How many layers are you putting on?
So I just did the 1 layer on the outside. And I was thinking about 2 layers of black and then moving to the color, but I think we might do just this one.
Does the engine call 1 layer perpendicular and a horizontal layer?
That's my definition of 1 layer. I don't know what other felt makers characterize. The question is want my layer, 1 layer of perpendicular and horizontal layout. And I think that's yes. Because if you're not equal in your laying out of the fiber, it's going to shrink more in one direction than the other. So having a perpendicular and a vertical layout as 1 layer would be evening out the fibers.
Now, what does the soap do?
So the soap, good question. I use olive oil soap because it's gentle on my hands and the fiber that I use. But it also changes the pH of wool. The wool is naturally hydrophobic, so it doesn't like to be wet. So adding the soap changes the pH and allows it to become wet quicker. It also causes the fibers slip against each other. So it really aids in the felting process. You can wet felt without soap. It just takes a little longer for the fibers to bind together. So right now, all those fibers that were hanging over the edge, I'm just pulling them back over into the center of the piece. Make sure that my work is nice and even. So I'm making fabric. So the important thing is to make sure that we have nice even layers so that I don't have a hole in one area or an extra thick area that has too much fiber. So the next layer, I'm going to use some hand-dyed colored wool. I really like to use hand-dyed wool in my work because it has, transitions from one color to the next, and it's really difficult to get a solid hand-dyed colors. So you have some softer pieces and some darker shades. So it adds a lot of depth to the finished work. And when wet felting, like when wool becomes felt, it has a very matte, like M-A-T-T-E look. So having that variety of color in your piece helps with the finished look.
The soft.
Yes. Oh, do you want to pass that on? And then this is some unbound.
I make it softer.
I think it's not as soft once you dye it because it, you have to heat up the wool and add a little bit of citric acid for the dye to adhere.
And do you buy it?
The question is, do I do my own dyeing? Yes. For the things that I do use dyed wool for, I do. But I use I use Dharma dyes. So it's an acid dye. And I use citric acid or white vinegar as the acid to create for the dyes to bind to the fibers.
What kind of dye?
It's an acid dye. So these are protein fibers, so they need an acid dye in order for it to be a permanent dye. And so the acid that I use is citric acid or vinegar. So it's a mild acid, but it's enough to get the dye to adhere to the wool fibers.
So now when you buy something, is that a huge process?
It is a process. when you dye the wool. It takes a long time. And you can't rush dyeing wool because you have to wait until it cools off to rinse it out, rinse all the extra acid off. Otherwise, you risk felting your wool in the dye pot. You have to heat it up. It has to, you have to cook it with the dye. And then, which could take a while depending on what color you need. Some dyes take a long time to exhaust. Once the wool is dyed, I usually leave it in its dye pot overnight to let it cool off over time. Then I'll rinse it in cool water the next day and hang it to dry. And it will take sometimes up to a week to dry. Yeah. So I added multiple dyes to this section of wool to get those different colors. Now, do you use batches? I would say that I don't dye in large batches. I use like old stainless steel cook pots on our stove top. So I can only dye like 8 ounces at a time in each one. Otherwise, the wool is too tight in that dye pot and you don't get the dye to penetrate through the fibers. Yeah, it's kind of stinky. No, that's okay. Where is your wool? The wool that I order from is from New England Fiber Supply. I think that's the company name. It used to be Ashland Bay. It's a wool warehouse. And they source wool from all over. So this superfine merino doesn't have the country of origin on it, but I would assume that it's from South Africa or Australia. Why? I think that's primarily the main markets are those superfine merino come from those areas that I know of. Yeah, so merino, when I say superfine merino, merino is the breed of sheep. So it's is that type of sheep. And it's different than I use another type of wool called blue face Leicester. So it's a whole different sheep, kind of like dog breeds. They have lots of different forms and shapes, and but the fiber for the sheep that they produce is different. And each breed of sheep has different qualification or different uses, I should say, for their fiber. So I use Icelandic wool for some of my work when I want to make like a lampshade that's really light, real thin layer of wool, but it's nice and strong. Icelandic wool is very robust. Is it expensive? The wool that I buy for Icelandic wool is because it's a U.S. Shepherdess. She lives in Montana. And I think I bought 2 pounds of fiber from her. And it was $60.
Yeah, how much is that?
Maybe. Well, I made,
Everything was on the table on the mom.
I would say that this blue braid right here, how much is the fiber that's on the table? So this braid right here is 4 ounces. So I would say we do have maybe close to a pound of fiber here on the table.
So the lamp shade takes like 8 ounces.
I would say not even. Maybe, I think maybe 4. I mean, depending on the size, but I think I only used like 4. One over there.
When you keep it in the flowers, you want to
No, this is just my extra.
have.
So now I'm putting on some decorative, like the decorative layer.
So like, how would you do it? Yeah.
The question is like, how do I make a flower shape?
Yeah.
That I don't use the resist. I just use the wool and shape it onto the surface. And that'll have to be another demonstration. I'm hoping to get this done before release. So these are woolly neps, NEPPS. So these are like kind of like when your sweater pills, like all those little bumps on your sweater that you have to shave off. That's what these are. They're dyed commercially. And felt makers can buy them for embellishments in our work. Make it look fancy. To add interest to the surface. This is going to be the top. So now I'm using some viscose, which is kind of like a little viscose is a plant fiber, I think. But it acts like silk fibers. It's real shiny and lightweight. And this is mulberry silk. So silkworms, like white silkworms, eat only mulberry leaves, mulberry tree leaves, and you get this real shiny, really high quality silk fiber.
Now, is it that color or is it white?
These are dyed. I did not dye these. But they're dyed just like wool fibers, because silk is a protein fiber. And then the last thing I'm going to on, I think, is this webby. This is a silk hanky. So it's a stretched silk cocoon.
What is going to be a soy or something? What is it made by protein?
So it's made by an animal.
What is it in that?
Like bamboo fibers are plant-based. Or like any kind of sometimes we use shiny plastic fibers called Angelina. And they're like tinsel. It's real shiny and reflective. So that would be a synthetic addition. So that's the top part of the missile here. I'm gonna flip it over and catch all of those fibers that are being over the edge. So I guess I'm gonna talk about our felting journey. So when we moved back to the US in 2013. And we don't have family here in Buffalo, so I started an Etsy store because at the time Etsy had a online artist community, but there's also artists who would meet up in person called like Etsy teams. And so there was a Buffalo Etsy team led by another artist named Sarah Goldhawk, who's a pottery artist. And so those are the first people that I met when we moved here, because I needed to meet people in this new community that I did not have any connections with. So I started a business and started going to the Buffalo Etsy team meetings and meeting new artists there and just starting my web. So I sold things on Etsy. Then I started selling at markets, I think in 2015. And at the time, I was always making weird vessels, and I would make like pins. But I didn't make scarves for the longest time, and I guess I was scared. I don't know, just, would people like them? So then I finally started making scarves, and that's a huge portion of what my customer base is now. Okay, so this whole piece is laid out. We haven't done any felting yet. It's all the layout process. So it's time consuming. So what has that in 30 minutes or 20 minutes? So half the time when I teach is spending the time laying out the work. And then the other half is creating that fabric. So right now what I'm doing is just gently massaging that wool on top of the bubble wrap. So when I'm felting, don't go whole hog right on your new piece, starting to rub, because we've just spent all this time carefully laying out those fibers, nice and even layers. If none of this wool is connected to each other yet. So you would just, all of those wool fibers would just slip away and they would not create a nice piece. So we're just gently massaging all over just to get those wool fibers to start to bind together. Put this over. So wet felting is, I have no idea how old it is. But, you know, they use felted like yurts, Mongolian times. They use wool that felted in the boots. Sails of ships were made from felted wool. It's an old art. Yes. Sorry, I'm thinking. Because it's probably like getting seasick. Getting
So you gotta go start to finish.
You can stop in the middle of the project. I would recommend, yeah, if you have to stop after the layout process before you start felting. But you can stop in the middle of the project and just kind of, you know, keep this on the table. I wouldn't recommend leaving it wet and soapy for more than a day. It will start to go south. Check that.
You want to have one. So we're broadcasting from here right now, so.
So in this picture, I'm pinching the wool and seeing that outside layer is still just coming up. So that means it has a lot more work to be done.
You guys want to?
Anyone want to come see? See that I'm like pinching out that last.
Yes, I can see right. It's like really good.
Not ready yet. Like the bottom, all of that blue that I just put down, that's just coming up. So it's, they have not meshed together yet.
Good, I got a front row seat. I can see everything.
Yeah. So usually when I'm teaching, I have people count to like, you know, 5 minutes of rubbing this side, 5 minutes of rubbing the other side, just to break it up a little bit. Yeah, when you go to pinch it and like the whole thing tense up, not just the outside layer. Over. It is a bit of mess.
That's why kids like it, right?
Yeah. Well, my children really liked playing in the soapy water. They didn't really like making the felt as much.
You're on.
So often I get asked, do the marks from the bubble wrap stay in the finished piece? Sadly, they don't. They do fade away once we start working it through. So I'm just adding soap to my hands so that when I'm touching the surface, my skin isn't pulling up those loose fibers, getting the top nice and soapy. It's gonna be a vessel like the rounded bowls on the table. But this method I use also to make the birdhouses. I would attach the string to the top of it first. And I also use this method to make the yarn bowls first. Yes, the birdhouses, in my experience, last at least 3 seasons outside. I did not take it off the tree branch. So I guess if you moved it inside and put it would last longer, but I just left it.
Yeah, I guess one of these are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can wash them. Mhm. Yep, there's special wool wash that you can buy from local yarn stores. I use Eucalan primarily, and Stitch Buffalo carries that. Soap. So if we look here, when I'm pinching it now, the whole thing is coming up. So we're getting there. At this stage, we're gonna start pulling the piece, which means we're gonna encourage it to shrink a lot before we cut it. So usually I bring a pool noodle, we wrap this wool package around the pool noodles. And students roll this like 50 to 100 times in one direction. Don't get wet. So I just rotate that circle a quarter turn. Rolling and felting this piece. So this helps the wool start to shrink around that or this. So you can see how it's starting to curl up a bit. So in the bubble wrap, you can see all the bubbles like floating in and out of the piece. So they're we're doing it to shrink the wool and to make it start to bind together and shrink, get tighter and tighter.
So the resistance actually in between the layers.
Right.
I didn't get that.
It is. So the resist is the key to making this 3D shape.
So when you were flipping it over, you were flipping the resist and putting wool on both sides.
Like
Okay.
wrapping the wool around the resist.
Oh. Now it's starting to make sense.
So you can see now it's starting to shrink. It has this like leathery look. This wrinkly texture in it. I'm just adding a little bit more soap on the outside. And we can rub it with the resist inside still on itself. Yep, the resist is the piece of foam that's inside this whole thing. Okay, that's good enough for now. So now we need to get the resist out of there. And think sometimes I cut my hole in the middle, right in the center. But in this piece, there's a spot right here that was all white and it didn't match the rest of the vessel. So we're just gonna cut it out. And that's where the resist is gonna be exposed. So I just took that little piece out. And you can see the resist right in here. So once you cut a wet felt piece, you need to seal those edges. And as you continue to felt your work, that hole is going to grow bigger and bigger.
Not what I thought this was gonna be. Now I'm mystified.
So now, if we take a step back, we started with all of these fluffy wool fibers, and we have a fabric thing. It's not finished, but this is not going to ever be fluffy wool again. So we have created loose fabric right now. So the next thing that I always do when I do a flat resist is you can see this like seam that's along the edge from where the resist was. So that has to go away in order for it to look. So I always work on that part first, just to get those little fibers to not show that seam.
This is wild.
So now we're creating a 3D shape out of a flat piece. So, and wool will shrink in the direction that you rub it mostly. So I'm rubbing it this way because I want those wool fibers to shrink, to make it taller. But I could rub the fibers side to side and it would be a short, flat little round thing.
I don't know how I thought this was gonna happen, but this is not how I thought this was gonna happen.
So as I'm rubbing, I rotate my hands. So I'm working on a different piece with every back and forth stroke. And sometimes I like to, you know, if I have really fine stuff on the outside, like silk fabrics or even like beadwork, as like beaded silk fabrics, you can felt those into a little vessel. So I'll turn those inside out and just really work the inside of the vessel. So right now, what you're seeing is the inside of the piece, all the black that we put in. And I'm hoping by the end of the finished work, you'll be able to see the black fibers coming through the layers of the colored folds and having it like a darker tone to those soft pastels. How much soap do I go through?
Yeah.
Quite a lot, you know. Well, when I teach a class, I cut the bars of soap into smaller pieces, so everybody gets their own chunk of olive oil soap. But I do order them like 12 bars at a time. And I think that would take, you know, it takes me about a year to get through that. Or like 3 bars, 3 big blocks of soap. Sometimes the French olive oil soap comes in big square blocks. So I'll go through, you know, 2 of those, I think, in a year. Maybe 3. In addition to the student ones. I ordered that online through Amazon. But I can use, I have used handmade soap too. So, there's a woman who makes handmade soaps. I used to go to an art show, Colorscape Chenango, and there's a woman there who has Maggie's Farm. She makes soap, and so she has this like felt maker's soap where she just pours all of her leftover soap from all the other ones that she makes into this like catch-all batch, and then cuts those into chunks. I really love that soap. It makes really nice smells. But I would never, ever, ever use Dawn dish soap. It's too harsh on the fine wool fiber. If the piece is really well dyed, it should not bleach too much. But depending on some colors, hand dyed fiber, like pink and like really hot pink and blue, the bonds for home dyed fiber are really weak. So when you add soap, it kind of breaks those dye bonds. So there can be sometimes where my soapy puddle is colored, because I'll use, you know, even when I dye the fiber and rinse it out and the water is clear, adding the soap changes things with the hand dyed fiber. So I feel like it has kind of a leathery texture when it's getting close to being done. So I'm turning it back inside out. And you can see on the resist template, like how much it has shrunk. So any kind of wet felting project that I start with that needs a definite finished shape, then I have to do math to calculate how big the resist should be in order to hit that ballpark. So with the lampshades that are stretched over a wired frame, they need to be really tight and like drum tight. So I have to shrink the wool smaller than the wired frame so that I can stretch it and sew it on.
When you start it, you do it like that. Or when it's dry.
When it's near dry. So if I needed to stretch a little bit more than what if it's smaller than what I intended it to be, when pieces dry, they do get a little bit smaller. Then I can use like a steam iron, like the steam setting on my iron and get that moist enough to stretch it a little bit more. So in the classes, I have people then to finish off their work, they can, you know, roll their piece and rub it tight. But we'll rinse it off in the sink before it's all done. Oh. So, towel.
And when dry, that whole plastic bag or something.
I used to have a ton of plastic bags and I would stuff it like as full as I can, like 50 to 100 plastic bags. This little vessel. I don't have any of those plastic bags anymore. So sometimes I'll use a balloon. I'll inflate the balloon around and then to shape it and use lots of interesting things to full it to make it really, really tightly felted. Like wooden spoons, you can keep the side of it. Or like what I'm doing now is just, you know, felting it along the tabletop. And that just like, shocks the fibers into place and kind of creates those more bold fibers. But what I was hoping that you could see is that it toned down those pastel colors. It's a lot deeper and darker because all of those black fibers have gone through the top wool layer. And the people at home right here can see that when they come in and look, but I don't know if you can see. You can see it.
Yeah, actually it shows up really well.
Yeah, it should have like this little black fuzz or halo on the top. So at this point, like, if I can stretch this piece, if I want like those ridges in there, I can shape it after I rinse out all the soap. I can shape it to, if I wanted like a tall base with like little side pieces. So that looks kind of neat. If I rinsed out all the soap and left it to dry like this, it would stay that shape. But if I want it to be like, you know, like round, I could shape it more rounded, I think a balloon would help to inflate it real more uniformly. But it has a nice organic shape, so you can like, once I rinse all the soap out, it might be neat just to try it and
Wow.
interesting shape. Okay. So when I say I'm a wet felter, or I am a felt maker, or I make felt, this is what I do all day when I'm making felt. And my whole body is all wet and full of fibers, just like my basement.
She was cute.
So do you have like a nice setup out there with the same?
I call it my dungeon studio. Half of our basement is finished, you know, where you can't see the pipes in the ceiling, and the other half is the laundry pipes in the ceiling. So, there is a ceiling in my studio, but it's not fantastic. It's the basement. Yeah, any questions at home, email the guild and I'll be happy to answer them. I'm all set. I'm all done.
And showing us art, it's fantastic and surprising to some of us. So the folks at home are gonna take a look at your still images now. For everybody here, if you wanna come up and take a look at all of the things that Suzanne brought with her, you're welcome to come and look.
I'll be happy to
Also-
answer any questions.
Oh, excellent, thank you. I did print out some meeting summaries from the last executive meeting to the people that wanted, so they are up here, you can grab those. And I think that's it. Thanks again. Sue.
You're welcome.